Howdy, howdy, fellow movie watchers, and welcome back for another edition of the Wisco Movie Watchers Podcast, brought to you by PTE Creative. As always, we're your hosts, Evan Davies, and our favorite internet bald man, Dylan Davies. You look so enthused to talk about the movie that we're talking about today. Just so energetic, ready to go. We are returning to our big box office series. Nice little hangover from Halloween is there are many of us who get sick of Halloween beforehand. I'm not one of them, but many people that do. And then once Halloween hits, they're like, oh shit, I didn't do enough with Halloween. So that next weekend and that next week after is all Halloween stuff for them still. So we're going to do a little Halloween hangover episode for you, the big box office series. Traveling to 1984 for the 40th anniversary, Ghostbusters. And we're going to have some fun. Lupin's even excited in the background.
Oh, yeah. Luke, what you doing, bud?
Just looking
He's
out the
too
window.
busy looking at dogs.
Looking out the window, looking for something to bark at. But we are covering Ghostbusters today. Obviously, customarily, spoiler alerts ahead, general thoughts on a rewatch from you. Because you and I have very different opinions on this
well,
film.
first off, I should say, I don't think this is a rewatch for me. I'm fairly certain that this is the first time I've ever actually sat through this for the full length of the movie.
No way.
I'm fairly certain I've only seen like bits and pieces of this movie. Because I know I've seen like the ending with the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. I know I've seen that part.
Yep.
I know I've seen the beginning library part.
Yep.
But there was parts in this where I'm like, this does not seem familiar at all to me. So I think this was like a first time full viewing of the movie for me.
That is wildly interesting because I used to play this movie quite frequently in our home. Now, granted, I know in our teen years, outside of hanging out with friends, our entire family was very much okay, doing my thing.
Yeah.
I'm doing my thing. We're in 3 or 4 corners of the house, depending on how many people were in the house at the time. So, it's just, hence the reason we are both the way we are. But it's so hard for me to think that this is the first time you've ever watched it bell to bell, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah. And also, the only other Ghostbusters movie I have seen is the garbage 2016 one.
Oh, okay. So the one that is when a real critic criticizes it, they're like, it's fine to not good. When an incel,
it was not good.
When an incel, it just says it's the worst movie ever because women are in it, and that's not the case.
It's not good. I would say that.
Okay, but it's not just because it's a cast of all women.
No, it's just because it's not funny.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. So that's the biggest thing. I'm now watching. Shout out to this YouTube channel if you ever want to go check it. It's called The Shit Show, and they document a lot of the makings of sequels or the makings of properties and things of that nature. You learn a lot of cool stuff in it, and it's fun because half the episodes I know about already. So I'm like, oh, I know how much of a pain in the ass Back to the Future was to make, but they go into like really in-depth stuff to where I was like, oh, even I learned a few things here or there.
Mm-hmm.
And they covered the sequels to Ghostbusters, and the 2016 Ghostbusters movie comes out right at the height of the Me Too movement and right at the height of the rise of Trump and the incel crowd that's just like hates women to hate women, hates people of color to hate people of color. Hey, this comes out on Saturday right before an election. Let's hope we still have a democracy after this one. But it's not fun. I voted to save democracy already, just so everyone knows. But like, you're getting that really hateful energy right at the time of that movie, and it's so funny that when you really break it down, because the reason I brought the shit show up beyond the fact that you learn a little bit more about it is they just break down the logic of this so much. We're reacting, or the internet at that time is reacting to a movie of women making a movie about catching ghosts. That's it.
Yeah,
The,
yeah. My problem is not with the cast; it's with Paul Feig
yeah.
as a director
And
because it just seems completely unstructured.
okay. And when you bring it back to 1984's Ghostbusters, it becomes a cultural icon. Obviously, hence the reason with the box office, it's the biggest movie, one of the biggest movies of the 80s in general. But
Hmm.
and I mean it's iconic and it's a franchise. It's one of the earlier franchises. People don't really remember that, but it's an earlier franchise film. It's just a movie about catching ghosts. That's all it
Yeah,
is.
yeah, and it spawned not just like a sequel, but like animated show and all that stuff too.
The animated show. They had their own brand of high C motherfuckers. Like, come on, they had good
Yeah,
shit.
and I'm sure they had Toy Line and all that
Oh,
crap
they had
too.
Toy Line. They had so many other things. I mean, look, the mascot to this movie that's not even the official mascot is iconic. The Slimer, like this is a
Oh,
cultural
sure, yeah,
touchstone. I mean, they've had video games, they've had all kinds of stuff, and it's a real testament to how much the '84 version is so iconic. Yet, is it that great? You know, one of our questions we always ask is it worth the rewatch? We're going to get to that through our discussions, but general thoughts on your first watch.
um, it's fine. Like, this is a movie I would watch. Like, if I was ranking it, like if I was watching when I watch like a Best Picture winner,
Yeah.
and I rate them always out of 10. I'd rate this like a 6, and I'd just say it was fine.
Okay.
Like, I don't have many thoughts of it. Like as a movie, I don't understand the hype around it. I think I just watched it too late
I think
because I have no built-in nostalgia for it.
so. I will say this. I've said this multiple times on the show. When I go track down movies, it's usually '80s movies. I love '80s filmmaking. It's
Mm-hmm.
probably my favorite era in general of making films because you're getting the advent of better special effects where you can start buying in a little bit more, and you're like,
Yeah,
hey,
sure.
you're getting this really weird vibe from new filmmakers, but you're also getting the height of all of the original Rebel filmmakers from the '70s, where you're getting
Yeah,
all their best work. Spielberg and Lucas and all these different creators, you know, the rise of Bob Zemeckis, we talked about Back to the Future, like getting all these, and James Cameron, who I just watched The Abyss for the first time 2 days ago. That was wild.
oh really?
Yeah, that was
It's a
wild.
great movie.
Yeah. It's one of those movies that I wouldn't know if I would say I love it. I like it, but it's one of those movies that you can't help but just be in awe of the production. You're just like, what a bitch to make. That had to be a
Yeah, that's
bitch
true.
to make.
Yeah.
And it was. And to this day, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, who's the female lead in that film, will not speak about The Abyss. She won't do it because it was that hard on her. And she
Well, I mean, it
refuses to
doesn't
work
help
with
that.
James Cameron.
Yeah, it doesn't help that James Cameron was the director.
And he's a
So.
psychopath as the director. So, but you know, you're seeing all those filmmakers come to the forefront. Plus, you're getting new filmmakers like Tim Burton as well. So you're getting all these great voices, and that's why I think I gravitate towards the '80s so much. But I also gravitate to the '80s because of our father, who was enamored with Bill Murray, and then passed that on to me, and I've been enamored with Bill Murray since I first saw him.
That's one thing. That's one thing that I will raise my hands. I do not get the Bill Murray thing. I have just never been a fan of his. Like, I like him the most in the Wes Anderson movies, but that's about it,
Uh,
really.
that's a wild statement, but I understand it because half my favorite stuff he's in is in the Wes Anderson films. I mean, I love Life Aquatic. Moonrise Kingdom is still one of my favorite movies I've ever watched, and he's prominent in both those films. It's more so he's at his height of just being improv crazed Bill Murray. Plus,
Sure.
in this film, it's perfect. He has his greatest partner to play off of at all times in Harold Ramis. And they are just a magic combination of comedy. For me and just so many other, for millions of other people, that is the comedy duo of the 80s, is Bill Murray with Harold Ramis, either as his writer
Mm-hmm.
or as his writer and co-star. So,
Yeah.
and again, wild stories with that one. Let's just start it off. Obviously, we have one of the most iconic theme songs of all time. Ray Parker Jr., Ghostbusters.
Yeah. That's my first note is, whatever happened to theme songs? Like, why does no one even attempt them anymore?
I think there's this thing. Well, the thing is, there are, but they're not the first thing you think about anymore. Like, I think the greatest use of them now is in Bond films, Daniel Craig film, where
Sure.
where you
But
have.
those are like the exception to the rule now.
I know. I think they're the only ones that really do it anymore, where they're gonna go. Granted, they always name it after the title, but I think Casino Royale has a phenomenal theme song.
I love that theme song.
Skyfall is obviously sung by the voice of an angel. Love you, Adele.
Yeah.
And it's one of the best movie theme songs of all time. And I think No Time to Die by Billie Eilish is also phenomenal. And you have three heavy hitters, plus even Quantum of Solace, even though the movie's not great. The theme song's actually pretty damn good with Alicia Keys on it. And
it's okay.
It's still much better than many other theme songs, and I think it's just one of those that. What's weird is, I think the 80s, it was just simply we're going to try to liven it up with some corporate tie-ins, but it worked. Like Back to the Future has both one with Huey Lewis in the News and ZZ Top both have really good songs from them, but it's not the title track, but they're put in the fucking credits as like, hey, this is the theme song to the movie. Plus you have the orchestral theme. But yeah, you are correct. I miss the days of the theme song where it's just like, we're gonna have a theme song because we can.
Real quick, the box office numbers on this is 229 million original release only.
That's pretty fucking big for the 80s.
1984. That's pretty crazy, actually, considering. Because I'm just trying to see here, like, the other movies would have been
84.
So total, 229 million for Ghostbusters. The closest one after that is Temple of Doom with 179. So that's a dramatic drop.
And that's the sequel to the highest grossing film of 81.
Yeah, and then you got Gremlins at 148 in third.
That's going to be my next
That's another dramatic drop, too.
Yeah.
And
those are both great returns in the 1980s. Those are both really big numbers in the 1980s.
From first to third, that's almost 100 million difference.
And today's money, that'd be wildly different. So
yeah, but that's a crazy dramatic shift.
Yeah, so
just from first to third.
So I mean, it shows you.
And then rounding out. Yeah, and then rounding out the top five, you got Karate Kid and Police Academy.
It shows the tone. It shows the tone of the 80s.
A lot of comedies in the top 10.
I mean, it's the height of the comedy. It's the 80s, right?
And then you got the one outlier is Terms of Endearment, which won Best Picture in 1983.
Huh.
Which was in the top 10 box office. Which also was a thought I had while watching this was, I am so glad we're not doing this in chronological order. Because, the thought I had was, it would be so discouraging to be watching this in chronological order. Because, not to say that the quality is going to keep going down as we progress forward in years, but a lot of it it somewhat will. There's definitely less quality as we move forward with like Transformers 2, Bad Boys for Life. It's like those are not quality movies.
Yeah, Bad Boys for
And that's
Life,
that's what that was the whole point of this.
Transformers.
Like, yeah, that was the whole point of this exercise. What I was doing this was like to look at like how did box office shift as we progress through the years.
It's an interesting thought process. I mean, and to get it back to Ghostbusters, it's this weird inflection point where,
The 80s is where it shifts. Yeah.
and I mean, I can't remember obviously every. I haven't looked at the list since I think we first originally looked. I actually, to this day, I still have not looked at it. I know the 90s and the early 2000s well because of the Oscar reviews, where I'm doing more of the research to kind of set the scene of what is the year like, what is those years like, where you're giving far more of the history of the Oscars kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
But Ghostbusters is this weird inflection point of obviously Ghostbusters is a comedy, but it's not just a straight comedy. This is not. There's horror elements to it, and it's too much to say it's not that. There's action elements to this, and it's too much to say it's not an action movie. Obviously, you say overarchingly it's a comedy, but it's not a comedy like we would know it, where it's like we're playing every scene for laughs possible.
It's not a broad comedy. It's like a high concept comedy, really.
Yeah, which I think is tremendous.
Yeah, because really the 80s is it's all blockbusters that are number one. Because it's Raiders, E.T., Return of the Jedi, Ghostbusters, Back to the Future,
Yep.
Top Gun, Beverly Hills Cop 2, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and then Batman. So it's like all blockbusters.
Outside of Beverly Hills Cop 2, I have seen and love every movie you've ever stated in that 80s category. And 1980 is Empire Strikes Back. So it's like, come on.
Yes. Yeah, so like that's the real shit is the 80s.
And that's the other thing is, just out of curiosity, because we just talked about James Cameron, is Terminator from 84, did that even make the top 10?
No, it didn't.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I can look it up because I...
kind of shows the impact of T2. But yeah, it's interesting. And we should get talking more about Ghostbusters because we keep talking time frame and all this kind of stuff. I will say, going off the theme song, the music in this is tremendous. Elmer Bernstein is a phenomenal...
The Terminator was 21st and made $38 million.
That's wild to think about. The depth that franchise has gone, and it only started with a smaller... $38 million in the 80s is still big money. Don't get me wrong, but it's wild that it's just that small of a movie, yet it dawns this endless cycle of Terminator films.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's really all based on T2, but going through the music, though, I made a huge note. Elmer Bernstein, his music is great in every movie that he makes, that he's a part of, but Animal House and I think Meatballs are his first two like comedy movies that he ever does. He does mostly like romantic comedies and dramas and things of that nature, lighthearted dramas and things of that nature. And then to get into this whole comedy arc, and he's doing almost every Bill Murray movie somehow, some way in music. It's kind of crazy that's a weird, like parallel where they're always together somehow. But his music really sets the tone really well with how they're doing this movie. If there's some more dangerous shit, they put it in there. But the levity is throughout so many scenes with just the tone of the music. I think it's tremendously done.
Yeah, the other first note I have is watching this with eyes from now. Bill Murray's a real creep in this movie.
Okay, so I have that note. I do have that note. I will say this. early on, I think the scene where he's like testing psychic abilities, fucking around, it's very much of the
Yeah,
time, and you can let that one
yeah,
slide.
yeah. I don't have a problem with it. It's like I get it. It wasn't a problem back then. It
And
was
there,
just
and here's the thing:
comedy.
as much as I love Bill Murray's performances and just Bill Murray's persona as a human being, like I love the random stories of him like just taking fries out of someone's hand on the street, and he's like, "No one's gonna believe you," and just walks away and eats somebody's fries. I'm like, that's awesome. It's so stupid and also bullshit that someone would do that, but at the same time, from a story perspective, it's just like it's funny to think someone's like, yeah, I am who I am, and no one's gonna believe that your story, so I'm just gonna do it. But I know there are some stories of the past of him being a little too just weird with women. I
Oh, in real life, you mean?
Yes, in life in general. So
Okay.
it's a little bit hard. Like there's an interview that he does. It's like him and Gina Davis are in a movie together, I think, or they're on the same like talk show, and because of his overall persona with so many interviews, it always feels like Bill Murray's playing a character, which is why I think he kind of gets away with some of that stuff. So you kind of always
Hmm.
give him the benefit of the doubt, like no, 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 like there's never been a real story of him being, a lecherous creep, drugging somebody or taking advantage of somebody. Yet I haven't scoured the internet to try to find that. Also, because I don't need that information, and that's not something I generally do about anybody. But I definitely can see it in that Sigourney Weaver scene the first time he
Yeah,
goes, and you're like, you're just such a sexual pest. And the only thing,
yeah.
I understand. I just said I'm very pro Bill Murray's performances. I love Bill Murray. I will say I did make a note later on that although there are still comedy beats in it, it's so incredibly smart and needed when later on when Dana's possessed by Zool and she's like going after him and he's just like he still has those comedy moments where he's like, well, and it's like the 80s so you can get away with that comedy, but he's like,
Hmm.
no, 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 no. I'm not doing this. We're not doing
Yeah.
this. It really redeems that character where you can see, okay, although inappropriate for our time in 2024, and it shouldn't have been done in the 80s or any time anyways. That should be obvious. However, it does show, okay, problematic, but he's actually not a total creep where you have to be like,
I
this guy's a
was
predator and we need to watch for this. You can go, okay, you're a pest and you need to really stop doing this shit. However, thankfully you have a line that you will not cross, which allows us as the audience to still like you.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was pleasantly surprised by that scene. I was like, hey, they didn't cross that line. I was surprised they
And
didn't.
and the thing is, I think that's where the brilliance of this film is I wrote down the comedy is great with chemistry. The three main leads all have extreme chemistry together, which helps because they're all friends, especially at this time. Obviously, there's a long-standing feud that thankfully was resolved at the end of his life between Bill Murray and Harold Ramis, but which is
Hmm.
mostly just due to Bill Murray's insecurities. But nonetheless, it's the understated comedy that really works in this. Like some of the stuff that's supposed to be like over the top comedy in today's audience, if you watch it the first time, you're like, okay. Like
Yeah,
the stuff that actually made me laugh was all the understated stuff that was just meant to be a little giggle. That's the stuff that actually made me laugh out loud. Where, like I love the scene of them getting into the elevator in the hotel the first time they confront Slimer, and Dan Aykroyd's like, "Oh, you coming up to that random old guy?" He's like, "I'll take the next one." That actually made me laugh because I was just like, "Yeah,
hmm,
it's fucking ridiculous that you idiots are walking around with these giant backpacks," which we then learn in the next transition of that scene is a nuclear accelerator on your back. And I loved how Egon's like, I love the understated, like, I blame myself, Bill Murray. So do I. Like, I love that little shit. Then he turns on the proton pack and he just slowly backs away, like,
Yeah.
I'm not sure about. That's the stuff that really works to me. Is those chemistry moments and those moments of understated stuff. But like over the top wild comedy moments, I'm usually like, yeah, it's fun.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And I remember, I can't, I can't remember how long it was, but I remember hearing that this script written by Dan Aykroyd was like, I want to say it was like 150, 180 pages or something like that. And it was just a complete mess. And then Ivan Reitman and Harold Ramis had to like completely rewrite it because it was just like completely overwritten and completely just like a jumbled mess of like quote unquote science, Dan Aykroyd science, where
So
it's like,
there are three important notes on each one on each person to talk about. One, Dan Aykroyd. When it comes to the paranormal, parapsychology, all these weird terms that aren't really things, but
yeah,
we as people love them, so they have a term now, is legitimately an expert in that field. He's so interested in that kind of stuff, and which is
yes,
why a lot of that stuff he says so confidently because that's truly a part of his world. He loves that shit, which is why I love in the new
mm-hmm.
Ghostbusters movies. And like, I know people are kind of just like whatever now with those movies. I like the first relaunch with Afterlife.
I haven't seen them.
I think Frozen Empire is fun, but I don't think it's great. I just watched it for the first time like a couple weeks ago. I love the fact that Dan Aykroyd is in a paranormal bookstore and like in a cult bookstore. I'm like, he's an owner of
Mm-hmm.
that. I'm like, yes, that's Dan Aykroyd because that's truly who he is. Like he has Crystal Skull.
Yeah,
What is it? Crystal Skull vodka is his thing.
yeah, I've had that.
I was gonna say you bought that one time for the holidays, so I remember that one.
Yeah,
And
it's fine.
and I know it's like an award-winning vodka, but it's also hilarious that it's like, oh, it's because.
It's no Tito's.
But it's crazy to think how much he loves that, and like his family's been into it his entire life. Like it's just ingrained in his head. So that's
Yeah,
why that melding of genre really works is because of his own love and sensibilities for it. But yeah, he's kind of a kook. Like he and by kind
oh
of I
yeah,
mean he's out there, and it allows him to be out there, and it's fun to be a part of that when it's balanced in this. When he gets a little too in depth in some interviews, you're like, Dan, I love you, but fucking reel it back, brother.
yeah,
Second, Ivan Reitman will never get enough credit for being a director, in my mind. He's a phenomenal director and also knew how to write really, really well. And he's not one of these directors that says, "Oh, I'm a writer," and then you go watch their films, and clearly the ones that are good, they had nothing to do with writing a movie, and the ones that they're bad, you're just like, yeah, you're the one who's fully in charge creatively. That makes sense. Ivan Reitman is a phenomenal editor as well, in terms of editing things in his story to make sure they get the best way to get there. And finally, Harold Ramis is a comedic genius when it comes to writing. He's also such a structural genius.
yeah. I'm pretty sure Dan Aykroyd had nothing to do with the actual structure of this movie.
I know he has a lot of the story. He's the one who puts the story of like the
Correct.
elements of what happens, but in terms of the actual structure, I would have to do more research to say this with 100% confidence.
From from what I remember, I remember hearing that the story was a complete mess.
Yeah, that would be logical. But Harold Ramis is great at structuring comedy. And all of the films that like, I know he was a huge part of Meatballs, Stripes, Caddyshack, like all these foundational films that really made Bill Murray who he is as well, which is part of the reason theoretically that their falling out happened. But he was so good at making sure not every scene was for laughs. There might be some funny things in it, doesn't mean like there's not a scene in Ghostbusters that isn't somewhat comedic. Like, even the stuff that's supposed to
Sure,
be like,
yeah.
whoa, it's like Rick Moranis running around like a crazed person. It's not played for laughs. It's played for like, oh shit, he's possessed. But at the same time, there's funny stuff. Or even when
Mhm.
Dana's possessed, the whole building blows up and she's just like, with her hair in her face. You're like, there's comedy in it, but it's not meant to be comedy first. So it really balances tone really well. I think that's such a smart play for him as a writer. Because it happens in every movie that he writes, at least early on in his career. It's very much we balance tone. And I know he's in the same thing with Animal House. He was part of the writing team for Animal House, and it's the same thing. There's moments where it's like there may be a laugh, but the tone is balanced extremely well because there's bad stuff that happens, and sometimes you get kicked in the fucking face and you need to get back up. And that's what Harold Ramis is really good.
Yeah. the Unfortunately, the big problem I have with this movie is like, well, for one, um, why am I blanking on his name? Ernie Hudson.
Yes.
He just feels like a complete afterthought in this movie.
So
Like,
I can discuss that.
okay, because like, yeah, just what, like, why is he just like given the short shrift on all of this?
So, to my knowledge, and I've seen a ton of behind the scenes for Ghostbusters and things of that nature, Bill Murray's central character, this whole thing was built for Eddie Murphy. The whole thing was built for Eddie Murphy. They really,
Okay.
really wanted Eddie Murphy. When they couldn't get Eddie Murphy, is right around the time Bill Murray came into the picture. Because, oh, Harold Ramis makes sense, let's go. And Bill was on board, and so they're like, oh, well, Bill's one of the biggest comedic stars on the planet, let's get Bill Murray.
Hmm.
So a lot of that focus that was supposed to be on the Eddie Murphy character goes straight to Bill Murray because it's kind of like it's always the movie I compare it to. You know how I'm like Batman 89, there's a ton of Joker because obviously
Yeah.
as much as I love Michael Keaton, the strongest actor in that film is obviously Jack Nicholson.
Yeah.
So the center of that movie shifts more to Nicholson. It's the same thing here where oh shit, we have Bill Murray. We're going to shift a lot of our stuff towards Bill Murray. And then that character, I have the same thing. Is I know in the future films they give a lot more for Ernie Hudson to do, but yes, it is. It does suck that he
That
shows up
makes so
like
much more sense.
he
Yeah.
shows up halfway through the movie and he has one prominent scene, maybe two.
He's given like nothing to do.
Yeah, he's very much just. I think it works in some ways from a character perspective, where it's like, well, yeah, it's the new guy, so he can balance it out a little bit more with like exposition, or when when they're in the prison cell or when they're in the jail cell, he's like, I just work with these guys. I didn't fucking do anything. Like I just got a job, but at the same
But
time, it sucks.
if you take his character out, it wouldn't change the movie.
Right, and that's the thing that sucks is it's actually what's so funny is for a character that doesn't get to do anything, it still has really helped his career.
Oh, it definitely has. Yeah.
And to this day, he's always one of those. I, I do a lot of fantasy casting in my head. I'm sure you've done the same. Where you're like, if I ever got to make a movie, I'd want to work with X, Y, and Z. Ernie Hudson's always at like the top of my list because anything I've ever seen him in, I'm like, fucking love Ernie Hudson. I would really like to work with
Yeah.
that guy.
I wish he was given a lot more to do because I wish he was like at like the end of Act One. He was added to the trio.
Yes.
Like that would make a lot more sense than putting him just randomly in at the halfway point.
Right.
And it's really unfortunate. I think the movie would work a lot better with Eddie Murphy because I think Eddie Murphy has a lot more charm than Bill Murray does.
That's
Just like
strong, but okay.
I think Eddie Murphy has a lot more like um like um unspoken charisma than Bill Murray does, in my opinion.
Okay, I can understand that. Because when you say charm, at first I was like, the reason Bill Murray is Bill Murray is because there's just this unspoken charm where
Yeah,
the vast amount of people that watch him are just like, I fucking love that guy. And you're like, why? You're like,
no, yeah, I don't mean like charm as in like he's not charming, like,
yeah.
but like unspoken charisma as in like he's just inherently likable.
Yes, Eddie Murphy has that in spades.
Yeah,
It
whereas
is a
like Bill
shame.
Murray needs you need to get to know Bill Murray a little bit more to like him. Because
I can
really, he
understand
just
that.
looks like a schlubby. I don't know.
A schlubby guy from the suburbs of Chicago. Yeah, that's exactly who he is.
Yeah, yeah, yes,
And that's the part of the charm of Bill Murray. But I do understand that, and it is one of the great shames. It's one of those great parallel universe questions of like, God, I'd love to live in that parallel universe that Eddie Murphy's in this movie just to see what that would be like, and also what would it be like if you got Bill Murray and Eddie Murphy in this film? Because that would be wild. However, I think that movie
yeah,
then also has to add 20 minutes to its runtime because you don't want to cut either of them. But at the
yeah. That's
same
true.
time, it's like, well, this is a comedy. We need to.
I would, I would, I would add 10 minutes to the movie if you added Eddie Murphy to it. I'd be fine with that.
Right. The thing is this, like, and again, it sucks because then once you know that, there are some people that unfortunately immediately go to, well, if Eddie Murphy was Ernie Hudson's character, that would be so much better. It's like, you can't compare anybody. Admittedly, Ernie Hudson plays a somewhat stereotypical black New Yorker of the time. Like,
Yeah, I don't view Eddie Murphy in that role. I view him as a substitute in a different role. Really.
yes. Right, and like that's the way it should be done, but so many people when they hear that, like, oh, it would have been so much better. It's like, it's not what we're talking about here. That's not. It's
Yeah.
not a one for one trade. This isn't like a quarterback switch or a wide receiver switch in football, where it's like, well, if we just take
Yeah.
this guy out and put this guy in, everything will be amazing. It's like, no, the part changes, your focus shifts. He definitely makes it into the first act of the film. He's, but then also you lose probably a lot of that expositional stuff at the beginning that I think is also really important because again, going back to tone, I think it's really smart. They establish ghosts as a problem, but also something to not be taken serious by people who don't see it, which I think is great because then
Mhm.
there are stakes, and you see these guys are like, oh no, they're not professionals. They're figuring this shit out. It'd been great to have like a Eddie Murphy there to balance it out. I would love to have just seen his rendition of in the mayor's office when he says that one line where he's like, "I've seen shit that'll turn you white." I would love to see Eddie Murphy deliver that line because it's just like nice, especially at the time.
Yeah.
He's in between Delirious and Raw. Beverly Hills Cops coming out. It's kind of the height of Eddie Murphy mania. It would have been
Hmm.
very fun to see him in that role, but at the same time, it's like I still think we got a great movie out of it. So cool.
Yeah. I mean, that makes so much more sense now, though. Like, yeah, that makes sense why Ernie Hudson's character is not prominent now.
Well, what's funny is this is I think it's also a testament to the fans and b making sure that they reflect the times a little bit more. Is when you look at the early promo pictures for Ghostbusters, if Ernie Hudson makes it, it's in a group shot, obviously, but it's usually we're focusing on the three. We're focusing on Bill
Hmm.
Murray, Harold Ramis, Dan Aykroyd. And then usually the fourth person to get attention is Sigourney Weaver. who, by the way, in this film is fucking beautiful. But
I was surprised that she was in this because I was like, why are you? Why'd you pick this movie? Because like after I was like thinking about like, this is 5 years after Alien,
yeah,
which I would think was like her big breakout role.
I think
But
it's
then when I looked at her IMDb, it's like she really didn't do anything huge between this or Alien and this,
yeah.
which was really weird.
Well, I think Sigourney Weaver is a testament to work, where Sigourney Weaver, to my knowledge, obviously Aliens 2 is what she's probably most remembered for, but she never had that like one movie out. Aliens 2 is the closest she gets. She never has that one movie where you're like, yeah, that's her movie, right? And she's just always good in everything that she does, and her profile raises because she's just good in everything that she does. But she doesn't have that string of movies or even that one big movie that's all on her. You just go, yeah.
Yeah, that is true.
Even to the point where
Yeah,
what's fun is you can get Sigourney Weaver to do Marvel television projects and a cameo Cabin in the fucking Woods, and she'll do it, and she's great. And when you see her, you're like, fuck yeah, Sigourney Weaver. But then also she can be the best part of the Avatar films. She can be this great piece in so many other movies. But yeah, you're right. She never really has that breakout role
she
afterwards.
she hit a stride in the late '80s where I think she hit back to back to back Oscar nominations because she got nominated for Aliens, Working Girl, and then I'm pretty sure she got an Oscar nomination for Gorillas in the Mist as well. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, right. But again, Aliens is the best known movie of that, and although I'm not shitting on Aliens whatsoever, because that's a movie I don't think I've watched all the way through. I've definitely seen pieces. I definitely know the iconic shit, but I haven't sat down and actually watched Aliens all the way through. It is certainly something in which the movies even you just listed, you're like, oh, I know those are good movies. But that's it. You don't really go like, God damn, that's a movie. I gotta go
Aliens
watch that.
is Aliens is good. Working Girl I watched and I really don't get why everyone loved it so much in the '80s. And I really loved Gorillas in the Mist only because there's gorillas in it, and it was fun to watch gorillas for 2 hours. So that's about it.
But yeah, it is fun to see the ensemble cast that they have in this. And her being in it really raises the quality of this film. Because if they had just had
That's true. Yeah,
if they just had some stereotypical '80s rando hot actress at the time, you would have been like, all right, well, okay, Bill Murray love interest, cool. But Sigourney Weaver being there, you're like, oh no, we actually have to play.
yeah, and she is great at playing off of Bill Murray, where she makes him look so much more likable than what his character really is,
Yes,
in my mind. Where
fair.
like he doesn't he doesn't seem annoying because Sigourney Weaver acts it as if he's not annoying.
And there's something to it, it's that weird boyish charm thing where at first she's just like, fuck off. I don't need you
Yeah,
anywhere near me. But as she's hearing more of the headlines and the other stuff, which is another note I wanted to bring up, when she's hearing more of the headlines and hearing the stories or on TV when they show some of the news stories about the Ghostbusters rising in prominence, you can see she's remembering it more fondly and being like, you know what,
Mhm.
there was something there. And then when she's outside leaving the orchestra, and it's that first scene where there's still some hesitance, but she's like, I'm gonna give this guy a shot. You're right. It's very
Yeah.
much through her lens. You can go, okay, if she's cool with this, we're cool with this,
Yes.
kind of thing.
I think it only works because she's such a great actress.
Yeah. So I mean, Sigourney Weaver is phenomenal in this movie. I love Sigourney Weaver in this movie. I like Sigourney Weaver pretty much everything she's ever done that I've seen. There's not really been any times that I've been like,
Yeah.
Sigourney, what are you doing? Like, I never really have that reaction in any movie where, you know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
nonetheless.
The next note I have is in all caps. More Rick Moranis, please.
Rick Moranis is a godsend in this movie. I
I
fucking
I love him,
love Rick Moranis.
and I don't why has he ever come out with like why he retired
His wife
and
passed
just like
away. His
okay.
wife passed away, and he pretty much just shut down. I believe he lives on an island off the Keys of Florida with his family, and he like literally would boat his family to and from school, his kids. And he just kind of once she passed away, he just was like, "I'm done." And the only
He wasn't that old.
no, well, right, it's right, it's like right after or right around the time of Little Giants in '94 that, and I think he's done. I think he did like one like celebrity hockey game or some shit after she passed or right around that time. And then ironically enough, of all the people to pull it off, Ryan Reynolds gets him for a Mint Mobile commercial for 20 seconds, and it's very Rick Moranis where they play into the fact that he's not done anything. And he's like, Canadian legend, Rick Moranis, and he's just like, why am I here? Like, we're talking about a cell phone company? Okay. But it's very much playing into that, like, I don't do things anymore. And it's a shame, because Rick
Yeah.
Moranis is fucking awesome. I
Yeah.
love Rick
I
Moranis,
love
everything I've ever seen him in.
I love him, and yeah, everything he does is awesome. And it's such a shame that he doesn't do anything anymore. That it's just like
Well, especially now that his kids are grown. You know, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I'm not in his head. I don't know, and you're only going off of stories that are through the media and the internet. But maybe it's just a case of like once she passed, he's just like, I don't fucking care about it. I'm gonna live my goddamn life. I'm gonna take care of my kids. I made enough money, and I'm still making residuals off of those old movies. Fuck it. I don't care. Maybe it's one of those. Who knows? It is, but
yeah,
it's. I would have loved to see Rick Moranis just pop up in some bullshit franchise just once, with
yeah,
even a cameo where you're just like, no fucking way, because everything he does is awesome.
yeah. There's not many more actors that are just like inherently more sympathetic than him.
Yes,
Like there's just something about him that's just like you look at him and he is just so 100% likable. Like I don't know what it is about him. He's just lovable in a way that like
it's that unspoken charisma kind of thing again, where when you first
yeah,
see him, that character is so meant to not be likable. And when you
yeah,
look at it through the character lens, you're like, God, I would hate to have Lewis as my neighbor. Because it means I have to talk to him. Just don't fucking want to. And that's another note I have in there. Is they make sure there's a lot of real world problems in this that are relatable, so all the characters are very relatable.
hmm
But when you first meet Lewis, you're just like, Jesus Christ. But yet, you're rooting for Lewis at the same time because you're like, man, that's Rick Moranis. We fucking love Rick Moranis. And you're right, he just has that thing about him that you're like, fucking love that guy. He's great. He's just tremendous.
Yeah. And his Canadian accent's coming out. It's great.
I would just love, like, if it were going to be pulled off, I would love some bullshit Marvel cameo of him being like a Canadian agent having to deal with Wolverine and Deadpool, and just being like, I don't, you didn't get the paperwork, you didn't do this, because he has. I would love that.
I don't want him in like a big budget thing. I just want him in like just a movie, just like a comedy movie.
Yeah, or I would love if he plays like some. He plays some like weird recluse in a family, and he only ever gets talked about. And he gets he has like 2 scenes. He's like 5 minutes screen time, but he's just that like weird grandpa figure that no one, like, everyone talks about, but you never see. And then you finally see him, and you're like, no fucking way. That would make me happy. I would go to a movie even if it wasn't good. If someone said, "Yo, Rick Moranis is in a movie," I'm like, I'm going to pay to go see that movie. I do not care.
Yeah. Like, yeah, and he was hitting like, everything he was doing in the 80s was just like gangbusters with the
Ghostbusters,
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids,
Little Shop of Horrors, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Yeah, he was doing a lot of good stuff.
I love Little Shop of Horrors. He's great in that movie.
I have never watched it all the way through. I think I've only seen little bits and pieces of it, which we're probably going to rectify because we did get some good comments on our Rocky Horror episode, and we got some requests to do Little Shop of Horrors, Hedwig, and a couple of other things. So probably have to put that on the Cult Classics docket.
Little Shop is great. I love that movie.
I would be happy to watch Little Shop of Horrors with Rick Moranis, because again, I fucking love Rick Moranis. Really, that comes from Little Giants for me, but yes, like everything I've ever seen him in.
He's great in that too.
He's awesome in that. The little brother of fucking Ed O'Neill, who also I wish did more film. God, it'd be great. What's funny is we're not really talking about a lot of the movie, and I can see why. Talking more of like the vibes and the people.
Well, I have a specific note about the movie.
Okay.
The when they first catch the first time they catch the ghost.
Yeah.
In that like that fancy hotel.
Yeah.
Dan Aykroyd has real Steve Irwin vibes. with his love for ghosts. He has like real Steve Irwin vibes, where he's just like
Steve Irwin before Steve Irwin.
Yeah, he like the way Steve Irwin talks about crocs and snakes and everything. Like, you can tell Dan Aykroyd just loves ghosts.
You're just hoping one day he pulls out an Australian accent. He goes, "Ghosts." Like, you're just hoping for it, because I know that's high praise from you. Also, for people who don't know, Dylan, to this day, but especially as a child, had a huge obsession with Steve Irwin, the Crocodile Hunter. To the point where you had the Steve Irwin action figure. People don't remember that half the time that was a thing. You had the Steve Irwin action figure.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like your Batman and Power Rangers. Those were my 2 obsessions as a kid.
Yeah.
Yours, oddly, was fucking Crocodile Hunter, and that was like same level for you as my obsessions.
Yep.
So that's high praise if you're saying he's got real Steve Irwin vibes.
You'd press a little thing on his chest and it'd go, danger, danger, danger. It was great. It was amazing. And then he had the movie Collision Course. Great movie.
I don't know if you can.
Maybe that should be a club classic.
Do you want to do a commentary track for that, or a cult classic?
Might have to.
It would be fun if we started doing commentary tracks on bullshit movies like Wild America, Collision Course, like those kinds of movies. We're not doing Dark Knight.
Yeah.
We're not doing, some of the other stuff that we're not doing The Exorcist. We're doing fucking Collision Course, Wild America, Track Down Timmy and the Tooth, or Timmy the Tooth.
Oh, yeah. I remember that movie, yeah.
Land Before Time. I think 3 specifically was the one we watched a lot. Like those kind of movies we're gonna do commentary tracks on. Seems like a really great market to make money on.
Yeah, a lot of viewership in that.
I, you're right. I think the other thing is, again, the tone is balanced so well in his love of Ghost, where he's like, it's so cool, it's awesome, but yet the rest of the world's just like, this is so fucking stupid. But when they need them, they all call them, and it's like, yeah, that's real world shit. Like that's not a problem. That's not a problem. Fuck, I have a problem. I'll go call the people that I've been ridiculing forever. Same thing. I love the reality notes of, again, it's a smart mix of real world and ghost problems. That call Sigourney Weaver gets from her mom, and the whole time she's just clearly like, I don't want to talk to my fucking mom right now on the phone. Every time Lewis is out in the fucking hallway, she's just like, fuck. Because again, it's that neighbor that you just don't want to fucking talk to. Even if it's Rick Moranis and you love Rick Moranis as the character, you can see why someone would be like, I don't want to fucking talk to my neighbor. That, again, being overworked. How much of the movie in the second and third act is all the Ghostbusters just going, fuck, I'm tired. I'm so sick of doing this shit.
Yeah.
And it's just like, hey, he interviewed. You're hired. Take this shit. Let's go. Like, you have a job because you have a job now. The being overworked.
The only B plot I wish was a little more developed was the Annie Potts and Harold Ramis plot line.
Yes, I would love that a lot more.
Like, just like, not, it didn't have to be like, a full scene or anything. Just like 2 more minutes throughout, like little bits throughout the movie. I just like little sprinkles of it would have been nice.
It would have been nice because obviously the comedy is, for her being legitimately, obviously she's playing to type.
100%.
But
very broad.
Oddly, there are moments where you're like, she is pretty tough. She's not just gonna roll over. She's not this like put upon, classic secretary that's just like, whatever you say. She's very much just like, fuck off.
Yeah, I love when she answers the phone where she's like, Ghostbusters, what do you want?
Exactly.
Great line reading.
It's the same note. I literally have, I fucking love Annie Potts. And then I also put, especially with Harold Ramis. And I do think just one scene of Harold Ramis actually showing real care for her could have been really good, because it could have been that little reward at the end for her, because when she comes and runs into his arms and is like actually concerned about him, and he does show some happiness to see her, it's good. And yes, it technically pays off that storyline, I guess, but it's not what it could be. Just one more scene, or as you said, 2 more minutes of interaction just put throughout. And I think it's one of those that if someone were going to rewrite this movie, you'd give a lot more to Winston, and you'd play a lot more into Annie Potts. Because they're both characters that people fucking love. And both have that whole vibe of like, God, I'd love to see more. But because that first act is almost all, we gotta set these 3 up. We gotta make sure you love these 3. They do a really good job of setting up the ghosts, what the problem with the ghosts are, all that kind of stuff. And also the life circumstances of the 3 of them at the time. That it's like, what do you cut? Like, out of the first act, what do you really cut to make sure you still get the vibe of the 3?
Well, 1 second. Where is it? The movie's only 105 minutes. So I would say, like, you could add
15 minutes and be fine.
I wouldn't even say 15, like 5 minutes to just like, and you don't even need like full scenes added. like 30 seconds of interaction between like Annie Potts and Harold Ramis, and then like another 30 seconds where you can showcase at least a little bit more of Ernie Hudson, because like he never gets anything where he gets to shine.
Yeah, his one big moment is yelling at Dan Aykroyd. That's it. He gets that one moment at the end where he's like, if someone asks you you're a god, you say yes. And it's a great delivery of the line. It's really fun. But yeah, outside of that, in the one scene he has in the car in Ecto 1 with Dan Aykroyd talking about Judgment Day, he doesn't really get that moment to be like, you know, it would be great if even a 30 seconds of him and Annie Potts together where she's clearly being overworked, she's already complained about it. He's like, this job, goddamn, I'm here all the time.
I was just about to say that. The interview scene, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's like, there's also nothing special about it.
Yeah.
He's also just saying, like, hey, if this job pays, it's fine. Like, that's nothing special about that. That scene's just like, you know, that's been done before, you know? Like, give him something there.
Yeah, I think that's...
Like, Harold Ramis, Bill Murray, you have people who are very, very funny people.
Yes.
Who I'm sure can come up with something there.
Yeah.
Give him something to shine.
Right, and that's... I honestly... This is long for an 80s comedy, honestly. 80s comedy...
True, yeah.
80s comedies are 75 to 90 minutes. You are in and out of that fucking theater.
Mm-hmm.
And so even 145 on this movie is pretty big. But in today's terms, you could easily get away with another 15 minutes. So you're right, you don't probably need 15 minutes, but 5 minutes extra, 10 minutes extra even in this movie, I think could really not only raise because obviously you've heard from my words, I love this movie and I think it's great. I think it could be brought up that much more with 5 to 10 more minutes of screen time for Ernie Hudson and Annie Potts. Just, like, even them doing some shit, like, restocking the fucking firehouse. Just, like, going to the grocery store and just being like, why the fuck are we doing this? Something like that, or them talking about how they're overworked, or whatever, and just, you know, like, plotting to go get another employee. Something like that. That would be fine. Because, ironically, like, everything is used really well, but it's the classic, like, you want more. I still think that you need more to make those two really shine.
And you could have Annie Potts with Harold Ramis, like, helping him do something in the station, just like, you know, running inventory, like you said. Like, that doesn't have to be a long scene, but it has them interacting at least.
Yeah.
Where it's like they can be fun and flirty. Well, she can be fun and flirty, where he's like completely scientific.
Yeah.
Like, that's showing their characters interacting at least, where it can be fun.
Yeah, or
like, I really love their interaction.
They are fun, and it's
even more than I like Sigourney Weaver and Bill Murray.
And that's saying a lot, because that was one of your highlights of this movie, was the two of them interacting.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think that'd be great. Just something, even like when he makes the joke of, I collect mold, spores, and fungus.
Mm-hmm.
Have him sorting his mold, spores, and fungus, and her actually, like, doing it with him. And you can see, like, and you can play it where she's just like, what the fuck am I doing? But she's clearly just so smitten with him that you gotta do it. It is interesting because in the newer films, shouldn't have to say this, but spoiler alert, for the newer films, they focus on his granddaughter and his daughter, and it's such. But
Harold Ramis.
Yeah, Harold Ramis' character, Egon's daughter.
Okay.
But at the same time, and it's really focused on his granddaughter. That's who it's really focused on. And they eventually put Annie Potts in Frozen Empire. They put her in a suit and she's got a proton pack, and you're like, yes, fucking love Annie Potts getting that role. But in Ghostbusters 2, I think she's with Louis Tully for like a relationship kind of thing, and it's just it's a missed opportunity for me where I'm like, if you have the strength of Annie Potts in that character role, make it so that she's the one that's actually grandma. She was with Egon, and eventually even she was like, he was too out there even for me, and I fucking love the guy. So you could have that interplay a lot more, and you could have even more connections to the past, where you have the reality play of Annie Potts' character, plus then you have more of the superficial ghost bullshit with Egon.
Huh.
It's one of those like, I would wish they would do that. I wish they would have done that.
That's a weird choice.
It's more so because then they could incorporate Harold Ramis a lot more in that movie. Because they even have like the hologram Harold Ramis in it, where he's a ghost. It's this nice little moment.
They did a CG recreation of him.
Yes. It's with the family's permission and everything, so the family was all on board. But
I know, but I am so done with that shit.
I understand that, but it was a nice little moment where the original Ghostbusters all get together, and then like they're all have the proton packs going and shooting at the villain, and then they get one extra little help from like Ghost Egon. You're like, it's a nice moment. It's fan service. It's what it is. No one can argue it's not fan service, but at the same time, it's a nice little moment to be like, oh, we remember Harold Ramis. We love Harold Ramis. But yes,
I'm glad you just spoiled that for me, because now I never am going to watch that movie.
It's 30 seconds. Like, it's not a big deal.
That just sounds awful to me.
I enjoy Afterlife. I think Afterlife's actually pretty good. And Frozen Empire, it's fine. It's a movie.
Why did they always have to drag the bloated corpse of the Ghostbusters back out?
They don't.
Sequels?
They don't. I think they have it very much in that. I shouldn't say that. They bring them back out, but they evolve the characters a lot more, so it's very clear. They are old. This is the passing of the torch kind of thing. It's what Dan Aykroyd said about I hate to say 2016 all-female Ghostbusters, but that's what it's known for. Where his criticism of that movie is on Paul Feig, where he's like, I think he has many interviews. I wish he would say it differently, but he's like, I think all the girls were great in that movie. I really enjoyed that. I think they were all great. I wish we could do another one. I just don't think it's going to happen because it wasn't going to make its budget back. And he's like, had Paul Feig listened to myself in the studio a little bit more, maybe the budget wouldn't have been so big. Maybe we'd get to do another one. We could really do this passing of the torch kind of thing. But I don't think I think so. When they do Afterlife, I think that's when they actually get to have that moment where it's like, okay, you're the Ghostbusters now. We're here. We're legacy characters. And Ernie Hudson actually gets a lot more to do in Frozen Empire, which is fun.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah, so Ernie Hudson and Dan Aykroyd are the ones who actually get a lot. Bill Murray's not in that movie very much. But it's one of those where it's like, if we don't put Bill Murray in this movie, they're gonna fucking riot. We need to put Bill Murray in this movie. And he gets maybe 5 minutes of screen time. Not even.
And I'm sure they gave him $1 million to do it.
I would have made the exact same choice. So I can't argue that either. So, but
my last note honestly was I'm not sure how this spawned an entire franchise. Like I get it's a good concept, but it's like I'm not sure how it has spawned like a Star Wars-esque universe, you know?
The animated series, The Real Ghostbusters, was incredibly popular at the time because this was truly a cultural phenomenon.
Was that like late '80s, early '90s.
Yeah. Like, I went into the 90s. That was
Okay.
on Fox Kids, even, when I was watching Fox Kids a lot.
Okay.
And I remember being like, isn't Ghostbusters old? At the time, it was only like 10 years old, but, or 10
Hmm.
to 15 years old when I was watching Fox Kids. Because obviously, I started watching Fox Kids around 96, 95, 96. Because again, we didn't get. Well, you watched Nick Jr. I didn't watch Nick Jr. that much. Wasn't watching shit like that. I immediately was like, Batman, Power Rangers, let's do this shit. So, Real Ghostbusters was on that. But Real Ghostbusters was really popular because it hit the kid market really well. This is classic '80s. Where if you look at this movie, why do kids like it? But it's the '80s, so you just take your kid to the movie and you're like, oh, it's Bill Murray will make us laugh. This is a fun family time, and they're cool, they're fun. Everyone likes the Ghostbusters, but it was truly a cultural phenomenon where it's like we're gonna get outside of Eddie Murphy, and they clearly tried. So it wasn't as if they just skipped Eddie Murphy. They're like, we're gonna get the biggest names and faces in comedy together to make this awesome movie. And at the time, it was considered utterly awesome. So that's why it became the franchise that it did. And once there's a Ghostbusters 2, that's when it becomes like, oh, we could do more of these, Do way more with
Well,
this.
Ghostbusters 2 makes perfect sense because it's just like that's like the studio forcing a cash grab almost.
Which is funny because Dan Aykroyd always wants to do more Ghostbusters. He always wants to do more.
Oh yeah, well that makes perfect sense. Also, I forgot to mention. Have you ever seen the "We Are the World" music video
No, I know plenty about it though.
where Dan Aykroyd's just in the background singing? It's so strange because like you have like all these like really big famous singers. You have like Stevie Wonder, Diana Ross, Bruce Springsteen, and then like just in the background of the chorus shot is Dan Aykroyd, this one actor, and it's just like, why is he there?
Huh.
It's so strange.
Interesting.
It's so weird. Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's just like I'm not sure why like Ghostbusters is the big franchise that is it Sony,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That Sony is like
Well,
holding all its
if this was
grips onto.
if another studio owned Ghostbusters today, I don't think we'd be in this. We need to make more Ghostbusters place. Where I think there's a fan base that loves Ghostbusters and would like to see another Ghostbusters. It's one of those that I like it too much. There's too many franchises that I just like. So unless I'm just out on something, if a new movie comes out, I'm like, I'll get to it when I get to it. Like I'm going to watch it someday. I certainly it was just timing. I never got to the theater, but I was definitely going to go to Frozen Empire. Just I never really found the time to go. So I am of the ilk that if you're going to say that's a problem, I'm part of the problem. I will go watch any Ghostbusters that I can find. Except I'd never gotten to the animation, so that was one of those shows that I never got into as a kid. So I'm like, I don't know if I need to go track down that animation. But look at the studio that you're talking about. It's fucking Sony. Sony's one of the worst major movie studios in the world. They can't do almost anything right.
Sony is one of the strangest studios where it's just like they just seem to grasp at straws, like, and not have a plan really.
The only thing good about Sony's studios, generally speaking, is that they will eventually fuck up with a property that they have sole ownership of, and it will go to somebody else who will probably figure it out.
Yeah.
AKA Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, Sony Pictures Classics is pretty good, but like, yeah, they're like big franchise stuff. I just don't understand why the choices they make at times.
well, I mean, it's the classic. studio were desperate to get a franchise. The thing about it is you can obviously attest to this as well. If someone's listening to this podcast and doesn't get it, you need to understand. Franchise films are the ultimate bang for your buck to actually make sure a studio survives. There's a reason you're going to get a Superman movie every 10 to 15 years.
That's true.
There's a reason you're always going to have Batman. There's a reason you're always going to get Spider-Man. There's a reason you're going to get... there's a reason Harry Potter, in some way, shape, or form, will always exist in the Warner Brothers catalog, trying to revitalize it. Unfortunately, yes. Again, because, for instance, I give a lot of credit, and someone could say they don't deserve credit for this. I look at something what Amazon's doing with, and New Line is doing with Lord of the Rings, where they're going into the animation world with War of the Rohirrim. That is where I think a franchise can exist really successfully without getting the negative stuff on a franchise. Where I think it was a very logical move after the success of Lord of the Rings that you wanted to stay in Lord of the Rings. Like, well, The Hobbit's arguably the most beloved piece of all of it. Why don't we do The Hobbit? You made an unnecessary trilogy out of it, but clearly they got returns. I would say the first one, although considered pretty boring by some, is still a pretty good movie. Desolation of Smaug I think is a great movie. And then Battle of the Five Armies is for the nerds. It's what it is.
It's atrocious.
It's problematic. I watch it for battle scenes. I don't watch it because I think it's great.
It's garbage.
I can't say it's garbage, but it's not good. I can understand you saying it's not good. Because I think it's still too well made to say, that's garbage. I can't say that.
Yeah, I will say there's one exception, because I just looked up Sony movies. The Spider-Verse movies are perfect.
But again, that's new ground. It's kind of what I was talking about going with War of the Rohirrim. For those who don't know, it's an animated film. It's coming out in December. And they're going over pieces of the lore of Lord of the Rings that's never been done on screen before. But they're pretty, for what seems like, pretty faithful to the material. And they're doing an animated feature about it. So you can still play...
Yeah, it's like an anime style almost.
Yes, it's very, very Eastern, Asian influenced animation style, which is really cool. So it's something you've never seen before with material you've never seen before and characters, unless they somehow get Gandalf in it or some shit. Those are all characters that have never been seen on screen before. So the only two logical characters that they could play with, I guess you could say Sauron, but Sauron, this is part of the Watchful Peace era. So it should only be Gandalf and Sauron, are the only two, or Saruman, could be the only two characters that theoretically you could be like, oh shit. But this is completely new ground for them. That's where I think these franchises could go, where, like you said, into the Spider-Verse animation, Spider-Man we've never seen on screen before. Different variations of Spider-Man we've never seen before. It's animation. It looks completely different. It feels completely different. And it doesn't feel like you're just bastardizing something that worked to the point where even you're sick of wanting to see the thing that does work. Where I'm always excited to see Tom Holland's Spider-Man.
I haven't seen them, but I'm guessing those Ghostbusters sequels, do they somewhat feel like that?
Ghostbusters Afterlife is wildly different from the original two Ghostbusters. It's set in rural Oklahoma, and there's still like some Ghostbusters nods there. And at the end of the movie, you get everybody. But it's truly focused on Egon's granddaughter, who's played by McKenna Grace, Finn Wolfhard, who is his grandson.
Oh, okay. Yep,
and then
I know her.
And then Carrie Coon is their mother, who's Egon's daughter. And that's why they go there
I
in the
know her.
first place. Is like they just like the whole thing is like she just separated and they just got divorced from dad, and that's why they're going out because it's like, oh, well, Egon, left her this house. They kind of like have to, and then secretly he's been working on this whole thing the entire time. Like he never let go of the threat of ghosts in the world. So he's got his own little secret Egon lab and all this kind of stuff, but it's in rural Oklahoma. But it's really told through their eyes, and it's only in the last scene where only in the last like 2 or 3 scenes when they're overwhelmed do the original Ghostbusters show up. Like, I think halfway through the movie they make a call to Dan Aykroyd, just like trying to figure out some stuff, and he gives a little bit more into why Egon was doing what he was doing. But other than that, there's almost no original Ghostbusters stuff whatsoever. So it
But
feels pretty fresh.
But is it like trying to create like a mythology out of Ghostbusters?
No, it's more just saying like there's ghosts everywhere.
Like Star Wars does.
Sort of, but it doesn't have that feel to me. It just feels very much just like, hey,
Okay.
we want to play in this world, but we don't want to. But we know we can't just do. Hey, there's new Ghostbusters here. We need to establish them first, and then we can do that.
Because at the end of the day, the Ghostbusters is just a comedy. Like it's not supposed to be like an action, world building universe
And so
comedy.
yes, there is
it's just a comedy movie.
And so that's the thing is there's definitely some world building there, but I think generally it's more of an emotional movie than it is like just a straight comedy. There's still plenty of jokes, there's still plenty of laughs, but I don't think it's definitely a world builder, but it's not just let's world build with Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson. It's very much like we're building. Oh, and you get to see them at the end. Like, okay, where Frozen Empire, the new one that just came out last year or like in March or whatever, that's definitely, oh, we're back in New York and we're at the firehouse and we're going to go bust ghosts and we're going to see all these old characters. And you're like, I almost wish, like, I remember at the end of Afterlife, they have one scene where they're going back to New York. And I'm almost like, I think that's a mistake. I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
I would just stay away from it.
I have a feeling all these big franchises that are like have become like the MCU-ification almost of all these franchises, where they're trying to world build and create like universes out of all these. That's not going to age well. Where it's just like it's just not going to. You're going to look back and think, why the hell did we do that?
Well, ultimately, we're already in that point.
It's so unnecessary.
Well, the thing is this, is like we said, to understand why franchises exist. It's the same reason why in the 80s you got sequels that you never thought you needed. Again, talking about Back to the Future on Shit Show. The studio called the Bobs, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, the major writer, for our audience. Mm-hmm. They said, hey, we want a Back to the Future sequel. And they laughed. And they're like, what? And then the studio had made it clear, he's like, no, we are making a Back to the Future sequel. And you can either be a part of it, or you won't be. Your choice. But we're making it, because that's how studios make money. And at the time, that's how they funded smaller projects as well. It's like, oh, well, we made, 100 times our budget on this movie because it was a huge hit. Well, that's going to fund X, Y, and Z. That's going to put all of us in bonuses, all that kind of stuff. Like, obviously, you know that. I'm just kind of reiterating that for the audience. So, like, when people ask, like, why do they do this with all these franchises? Because we as an audience still want to go see that shit. Generally speaking, because, oh, I loved that as a kid, or I loved the last one. I want to go see that again. I want to have that same feeling. There's a reason most sequels don't work because they don't have the same magic that the
Yeah,
original movies
sure.
do. So, like, obviously, I know you know that, but that's what people don't get. Is
I just wish they would focus on telling a better story versus let's try to build this world out. You know?
right, and the thing is, this is I think Star Wars is a good place to world build because there was so much world building in the prequels and the Clone Wars that there was like
Yes.
you've introduced too much shit here that's interesting for me to just go, meh, let's just focus on Luke Skywalker the whole time. However, what pissed people off is the fact that you treated Luke Skywalker like a fucking chump. So, yeah. Whereas Ghostbusters, you're right. There's no need to world build for Ghostbusters. There's no need for that
Yes.
shit. And that is something I will say to your point that was on Shit Show. Was Sony Pictures said we want to have multiple Ghostbusters films in production or being shot even at the same time. We really want to make this a thing. And I just don't
Oh.
I just don't think again that shows Sony desperation, right? Because the other thing
Yeah.
is this is a very important note for Ghostbusters was knowing to protect it. And I think it was after Ghostbusters 2 even. Maybe it was beforehand. I'm not sure. They had an option where you had to get to make the movie, you had to get the written approval of Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, and Bill Murray. If you didn't get all three, you couldn't make the movie. Which is why for years they tried to make one, and Bill Murray's like, "Fuck no." Like, no.
Hey, that's a good way of doing it, I think.
Well, again, the other thing is this is although it was mostly due to his just aloof nature and his personal issues with Harold Ramis at the time, there is a good point where one of the quotes Bill Murray like he got sent a script by Harold Ramis and Dan Aykroyd when things were heating up again trying to make another movie where he just sent it back with one line response. He said, "No one wants to see a bunch of overweight old men catch ghosts." And he just sent it back. He's like, "No."
Yeah.
And although that statement is not inherently true as proven by box office,
Sure.
it's also very much the protection of like, he's not wrong. He's not right, but he's not wrong. There needs to be a difference in what we're doing here. And
Yeah.
I think it goes into a lot of things that we just always get into with as fans and as people who always bitch about studios. We're part of the problem. That's just the truth, you know. Whereas,
Well,
like the
I'm
only
not.
thing,
I don't go to theaters.
well, that's the other thing. But you buy the merchandise, you buy the home video, like, you know,
Sure.
on stuff that you love. Hence the reason you have the goddamn chainsaw from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre behind you right now. Yeah,
Sure.
you got the Wilson volleyball behind you. You know, that's
Yeah.
that's part of it. Whereas, like, obviously, those are two extemporaneous circumstances. I mean, like, hey, wonder if I'd watch a Power Ranger movie again. Like,
Yeah.
or should I get Charizard down? Like, wonder if I'm gonna keep doing Charizard and Pokemon shit. Like, it's simply the thing is like we feed the beast, but at the same time, we are trying to demand quality. It's something that Mike Florio is one of the best coverage guys for football. He's like, if you really want to make sure that something changes with your football team, don't watch them and don't buy a ticket. He's like, if you want your team to stop sucking,
That's true.
don't give the owner money, because then eventually the owner has to learn that, he's just like people that are bitching about the Jets right now and how they suck with Aaron Rodgers. He's like, you want to make sure your owner actually has to do something better or maybe sell the team? Don't go to the game and don't watch that game. He's like, I understand. It's part of your identity. It's part of your whole thing. When I look at this,
Yeah.
the things I love in pop culture are part of who have made me who I am. It's very hard to just be like, not interested. But I also have the wherewithal to go like, nah, Like for the first time ever, there's a lot of like newer Batman comics where I just don't like what they're doing with Batman. I started reading one from the library and I just went, I don't want to read this. I don't like it. It's not my cup of tea. I'm not gonna read it. I'm not gonna go buy those comics because I want to do it. It's the only way to really impact it. But people are gonna keep buying that awesome Ghostbusters logo. They're gonna keep buying toys when they come out.
Yeah.
When a $500 hot toy comes out of fucking Egon Spengler with a goddamn proton pack and that one little burst of goddamn shit from the proton pack, people are gonna lose their fucking minds and they're gonna buy them because that's why we're in the state that we're in with some of these franchise films. Plus, we all demand to have good shit on streaming services, but that never works. So, it's a whole. One day we'll have to do a whole dichotomy of what happened to the movie industry. That'll be a fun bitch upon episode.
Oh, yeah. A lot of bitching there.
But overall, you already said it. You'd say 6 out of 10, it was a movie. The only other notes I really have, because I know we've been going long on the other stuff, is we could use a little bit of ILM magic here. I think this movie could have been improved with ILM doing its special effects and not whoever did its special effects. All due respect to them. Like, even, like, it was the only thing that I could really, really critique where I was like, the matte paintings. I was like, I can clearly tell that's a matte painting. And I'm not saying when you're looking for it, you can't see a matte painting. But it was one of those where I was like, it's not seamless enough to let it go.
But it's still very early for.
I know, and I get it because
very early.
I know it's still early, but it's one of those that ILM already at that time had proven we could raise the bar a lot more. And so had they gone to ILM with this movie, I think things would get better. Because I know they eventually go to...
Also...
They go to ILM for Ghostbusters 2, but they don't go to ILM for Ghostbusters 1.
Also, my guess would be that they did not have the budget that the Star Wars movie had. The Star Wars movies had.
Well, I mean, ILM is built for Star Wars in general, so no shit they're going to have ILM do.
Yeah. That'd be my guess.
But it's the only thing I was like, could you use a little ILM magic? Like the weird demon dogs.
Oh, sure.
We could use a little ILM magic there. Just a little bit more. Other than that, we've kind of hit on a lot of stuff. The only other thing I really hate is that the villain is the Environmental Protection Agency. I'm like,
oh yeah,
typical Reagan era bullshit. Like,
yeah,
and I don't think Dan Aykroyd's that guy. I don't think he's like some crazy right wing. Like, oh
no,
I don't believe in the environment.
I don't think so.
But it just sucks. It's like typical Reagan era bullshit where it's like Environmental Protection Agency. Who needs that?
Also, yeah, why would the EPA be the villains there? Like,
I think it's solely they needed a villain. They wanted to go the government route, and they're like, well, what government agency would really come after them for that? It's like, I don't know, the EPA.
Doesn't really make sense, but okay, yeah.
Because I will say the other note that I had was I do love that what saves a movie is the appeal to political greed. The whole crux of of them saving New York is Bill Murray appealing to the mayor through votes, where he's just like, "You'll save the lives of millions of registered voters," and I'm like, this hits home in an election cycle where I was just like,
that's one note I also wrote down is in that same scene where the Catholic priest comes in and the mayor kisses the guy's hand.
Yeah.
I mentioned this in the Exorcist episode.
Yeah.
Where the guy kisses his hand. And I was like, even in comedies, that gives me such the creeps.
Yeah, it's weird.
I'm like, it's so fucking weird.
It's weird, and I do love the fact that right after them, he gives him like the old Gavone slap to the cheek.
Yeah.
Trying to think, I'm like, at least he's getting him back a little bit, but
Yeah,
It's weird. It's still weird. It's still weird.
I just it gives me
However, I will
heebie-jeebies.
say that is a really good scene in terms of dialogue interaction. I've there's
Sure, and I will say that's the greatest Bill Murray line in the movie is where he says, "It's true. This
this
man
man
has
has
no
no
dick."
dick. Yes, it's tremendous because, and I just love him backing up like, well, that's what I heard. Like because it's still true to Bill Murray. It's true to the character. It's funny. Again, this movie does a really good job of setting up their characters, and their characters stay true to the characters. There's not a whole lot of. There's nothing where you're like that seems out of character for what they set up. Like that doesn't make any
Yeah,
sense. You know, and the whole thing I think can be summed up in Rick Moranis' final line of the film. But I want to go with them in the car. I love that scene.
yeah,
Where it's just saying, "I'm an eyewitness. Does anyone want to interview me?" Just like, but all right, sir, we have to get. I want to go with them in the car. I think that's the whole cultural phenomenon. I want to be with them. They're cool. I want to go with them.
yeah.
I think it's the easiest way to sum it up. Alrighty. Um, any other last final notes before we ask our final questions? I know we did a lot of meandering and we didn't talk about the film as much as we usually do.
No, yeah, like I said, it's an enjoyable movie. It's just like considering the buildup. I've always heard about it. Like it just, I don't know. It just didn't match.
I don't think. I will say this. I think this can be an additional question to some of these older movies that are cultural touchstones. I just had this experience last night where I don't care if this sounds bad. I was completely chastising Ab because I was watching Night of the Living Dead when she came in. She's like, "What?" She's like, "Why? What's so important about this?" Is like, you do not understand how important this movie is to like cinema. And yeah, it's not
Hmm.
perfect, but it's important. And then it was on Peacock, and they had the 1990 remake that's colorized. And she's like, they made that movie on purpose twice. And I was just like, you better watch your fucking words, woman. Like, sorry, because obviously that's the joke I have. But it's just like, you better watch your fucking words,
Yeah,
girl, because that's bullshit. That movie's so goddamn important to cinema culture in a weird way
yeah,
and cult culture. I was like, she's like, I guess I just don't get it. I'm like, clearly you fucking don't.
yeah.
Um,
Well, there's always going to be those movies where like you have to understand the importance of it. Unfortunately,
yes, and that's the thing is like, I get it. In a lot of those movies, you either like them or you don't. You don't get it.
yeah.
It's the same thing. I've never sat and watched The Shawshank Redemption all the way because it's gotten to the point where it's just like it's the perfect movie, and it's just bros talking about like Shawshank to the point where I'm like, I've seen this movie throughout clips my entire life. I know what happens. I know the whole movie.
So,
I don't feel the
so
need
if
to
we
go
watch
watch
that,
this.
yeah, if we watch that, you'll probably have my reaction to Ghostbusters.
Right. I'll probably be like, it was fine. It was a good movie. Okay.
Yeah,
And 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 I understand that's a controversial thing for someone with a movie podcast to be like, oh, I've never watched Shawshank. It's like it's the same thing. When you go back and watch The Godfather as a modern audience member, you can like if you know how important that movie is, you can go, oh, okay. But frankly, The Godfather's fucking boring. It's a long ass movie and it's not very exciting.
I disagree with that.
Here's the thing. I love it. I actually do like that movie. I've done a presentation on it for school. Like I actually do like The Godfather, but I can't sit there and argue for a modern audience member just going into The Godfather being like, "Oh, I heard good things." I can't say like super exciting. It's paced really really slowly, intentionally, and I get it. And it's very generally faithful to the book. But at the same time, like yeah, as an audience member, you're just like, it's fucking slow. So
Yeah,
I think when you go like, does this hold up from a cultural standpoint? I think yeah, I could understand someone like a like a Gen Zer just getting into movies like you did when you were 15,
hmm,
or myself when I first found this when I was 15, 16, tracking down a lot of 80s movies that I ended up loving. If you don't get it, if you don't understand the cultural perspective of it, I think, and you just go, oh, I've heard a lot about Ghostbusters. You just watch it, you kind of go, okay, it's a movie. It made me laugh a little bit. Okay. And I can see that. And I can understand that.
Yeah.
Is it worth a rewatch, though?
I would say yes. I think I probably will rewatch this in 5 years or so.
I would always argue it's worth a rewatch because I also think I am biased. I love Bill Murray. I love Bill Murray's 80s stuff a lot. A lot. Mm-hmm. I mean, yet I don't think this is his best 80s movie either. I just think this is what I think is really worth watching is this is a movie that understands character and understands dialogue really well. And how to really make a... Also, I think this is a movie that should be studied by modern comedies a lot more. Because they remember this as like, oh, it's so laugh out loud funny. It's like, yes, it was. But it's layered. It's not your, I'm going for a joke every 5 seconds to where if the whole thing is funny, it's not funny kind of thing. Or so many modern comedies that just doesn't work.
And I will say the structure of this movie is really, really good.
Yeah.
In terms of just like the overall screenplay structure of it is really, like, if you just want to talk about the structure of it, it's really great.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about just comedy, but
yeah,
comedy is subjective.
Right. But I think this is a really good way to story structure, as you said, really solid. Plus, I wish more modern comedies had more moments where it's not just we're going for the joke. To the point where like there's a lot of times no one even talks about a modern comedy movie because they don't really exist anymore. They're Netflix originals or they're streaming platforms originals, and those have all gotten watered down to the point where no one wants to watch them. Or the vast majority of people just go, no. Did you remember when Netflix original was such a stamp of quality that you had to watch it? Or if you didn't watch it, you could still go like, yo, I know it's really big. Like, I never watched House of Cards, but I knew like, oh shit, that's really respected. Like, because I know how high quality it was. Now, if I see Netflix original, I just go, I don't need to watch that. Yeah. Not interested.
Because there's like 15 million of them a year.
Exactly. So you just go, well, that's not worthwhile. Whereas I remember when the first Stranger Things came out, Netflix original was like, oh shit, this looks like a show I'd really be into. And it turns out I am. But it was still when that stamp of approval was like a big thing. And now it's like, dime a dozen fucking romantic comedies, weird, somewhat ethnically focused sitcoms, other shit where you just go, okay, like, it's not my cup of tea, and I have no interest in watching it then. Yeah. And is this worth the box office?
I would say obviously yes, it was, because it made, what is it, 60 million more than, no, 50 million more than everything else. Like, that's an impressive number.
A, yes, and B, I will say this, I think this is probably a caveat that we need to put on all of the older films, is our age group grew up in the era of home video and beyond.
True.
Whether it was VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, streaming service, everybody our age, slightly older than us, and everyone younger than us has grown up in the era of, oh, well, you can just watch it whenever you want to. You just got to bring it home, or you just got to find it. This is before that was a thing. Like, Betamax was just becoming a thing. So the home video market and video rentals were just really becoming a thing. So if you wanted to go see Ghostbusters again, or if you want to see Ghostbusters, your options were go back to the movie theater and go watch Ghostbusters, or wait till it eventually came on television, which wasn't as prevalent because you didn't have as many cable channels, you didn't have as many, options. So your only way to go watch the movie was to go watch the movie in theaters. So I think that is a caveat we do need to understand in culture, but I think it's well worth the watch.
Yeah.
I think it's a great way to call it on this one and enjoy. I would highly recommend, if you haven't watched Ghostbusters, go watch it. I think it's a fun movie. Enjoy.
Okay. So I pulled up the random number generator here.
Oh boy.
For our next pick.
Forgot we're out of Halloween time where we're not as structured, where it had to be like this, that.
We got 1995. Pretty sure I know what that means.
I think that's Batman Forever.
It is Batman Forever.
Ironically, I just rewatched that movie. Okay. We'll get into it more in the show that we cover it. Batman Forever is not nearly as bad as people think it is, because they just associate it with Batman and Robin, which is utter trash and should be burned at the stake.
I'm going to tell you right now that this is my least favorite of the 4 Batman movies.
Of the
first 4.
You like Batman and Robin more than Batman Forever?
Because Batman and Robin is at least really, really shit. So it's at least more fun.
Because you can just make fun of it?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a personal choice. It's a personal choice, I guess. Alright, so now our next big box office, we're going to 1995. You are a fresh year old, and I would be 3 years old at the time of that release, so that'll be a lot of fun. I mean, yeah, almost every summer of my youth, a Batman movie is in theaters in some way, shape, or form. I was born right after Batman Returns, and when it was the height of Batman Returns. We got Batman Forever, Mask of the Phantasm was released. Batman and Robin. Couldn't escape Batman back then, so it's going to be fun. It's going to be enjoyable. But that is going to be our next big box office series episode, and we're going to have a heck of a lot of fun with it. I hope y'all enjoyed your time here on the show, because we did. Stay in touch with us. Check your socials. Check your other stuff. We got all the stuff coming. It's going to be a lot of fun with some new things coming your way. But that has been the show for us today. I'm your host, Evan Davies, along with your co-host, Dylan Davies. Go watch a good movie. Peace, love, and hugs to you all, and happy belated Halloween to anyone who's celebrating this weekend.